Judge Mathis slammed his gavel immediately, glaring viciously at Brandon Jackson, who stood trembling under the intense scrutiny that rippled fiercely across the courtroom walls, capturing everyone's attention with a sudden, electrifying force. "Explain yourself, sir." Judge Mathis sneered coldly, his tone cutting through Brandon's composure like a blade, making the young father's hands shake uncontrollably as he clutched a worn folder containing documents that detailed every attempt he had made to remain an active participant in his son's life. The audience stirred nervously, sensing the eruptive tension fueled by the judge's obvious distaste for Brandon's explanations. Brandon inhaled deeply, steadying his trembling voice as he began. "Your Honor, I've come here today because I want to prove my commitment. I've worked multiple jobs, provided consistent support, and maintained contact with my little boy." But Judge Mathis scoffed, rolling his eyes with open disdain. "Spare me the sob story," he spat, leaning forward to deliver his sharp critique directly. "I've heard plenty of excuses from fathers who can't be bothered to step up. Now, show me real proof, or don't waste my time." A collective gasp rose from those watching, who were startled by the blatant hostility in the judge's tone, especially since Brandon had not yet displayed disrespect or negligence. Brandon's throat constricted painfully, tears threatening to reveal the deep frustration coursing inside him. He tried to swallow them back, forced a respectful nod, and shuffled forward to the bench, handing over carefully collated receipts, visitation logs, phone transcripts, and statements from neighbors affirming his presence in the community. Judge Mathis snatched the paperwork briskly, flipping through the pages with palpable skepticism, his lips pursed tightly. "This better not be fabricated nonsense," he muttered, sending a shudder through Brandon's spine. In the front row, seated inconspicuously under a baseball cap and sunglasses, was none other than LeBron James, in town for a charity event and visiting the courthouse after hearing rumors about Judge Mathis repeatedly browbeating fathers from disadvantaged backgrounds. LeBron's heart pounded angrily in his chest as he observed the overt disrespect. He had grown up watching paternal absence devastate families and believed wholeheartedly in uplifting responsible fathers who simply needed a fair chance. As the tension escalated, Brandon's ex-wife, Tammy, smirked confidently. She looked immaculate in a tailored blouse, arms folded as she eyed Brandon with what resembled triumph. "Your Honor," she said coolly, "this man is all talk. He hasn't paid half the support he claims. My child rarely sees him, and I can't rely on him to show up." Brandon inhaled sharply, eyes pleading for a moment's mercy. "That's not true," he countered, voice quivering. "I've made every payment I could, even when working double shifts. I've never abandoned my son." Judge Mathis rolled his eyes again. "I've heard these excuses from countless men," he announced to the entire courtroom, shaking his head in contempt. "Half of them run around producing documents that never match reality. So tell me, Mr. Jackson, why should I trust you?" Brandon's cheeks flushed at the condescension. "Because I have proof," he managed, pointing anxiously toward the documents. "I have bank statements verifying every deposit. I have text messages showing I confirm visits, and I've never missed a scheduled day without notifying Tammy." But the judge's eyes narrowed. "If you cared so much," he snapped, "you wouldn't be in arrears or behind on child support at all, would you?" Brandon attempted to clarify. "The financial statements reflect a temporary unemployment period," he said, voice tinged with desperation. "I got laid off unexpectedly, but I caught up as quickly as possible. I've done everything in my power, Your Honor." Judge Mathis barked, "I'm not convinced," and tossed the paperwork aside with a dismissive flick of his wrist. A hush of shock fell over the gallery as pages scattered across the polished desk. Tammy's grin widened, but Brandon's heart sank, his fingernails digging into his palms. A soft murmur rustled among the spectators, many of whom silently sympathized with Brandon. sensing that the judge's tone lacked even a semblance of neutrality. Then, a tall figure stood up, removing his cap, revealing an unmistakable face that sparked an instant flurry of whispers. LeBron James cleared his throat, stepping forward with quiet confidence. The bailiff blinked in astonishment, uncertain how to proceed, but before he could intervene, LeBron spoke. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I'm sorry for interrupting, but I've been sitting here listening closely, and I need to address something." Judge Mathis blinked, stunned by the sudden interjection of a world-renowned athlete. "Mr. James," he began, trying to keep his composure, "this is highly unconventional. What interest do you have in this case?" LeBron removed his sunglasses, scanning the room before locking eyes with Judge Mathis. "I've listened to how you've spoken to Mr. Jackson," he said, voice resonating with calm authority, "and it disturbs me. We're talking about a father trying to do right by his kid. I know what it means to come from a challenging background, and I believe in second chances. I can't stand by while you insult him without fully reviewing the evidence." A low rumble of agreement passed through the crowd. Judge Mathis pressed his lips together in annoyance. "Mr. James, while I respect your accomplishments in basketball, you have no standing to lecture me in my courtroom. If you think pity parties replace consistent fatherhood, you're mistaken." LeBron's gaze intensified. "And if you think belittling a man who's making every effort is fair justice, then you're mistaken," he retorted, not raising his voice, but letting each syllable carry his unwavering conviction. Brandon stood there, half in disbelief, half in immense gratitude, his eyes glistening with the realization that someone so influential was willing to intervene. Tammy huffed, crossing her arms more tightly as she surveyed the unexpected twist. She muttered, "This changes nothing. He can't fix Brandon's inability to commit." LeBron shifted his attention toward Tammy. "Respectfully," he said, "I understand your frustrations, but from what I've seen, Brandon is showing proof of support. The judge may be missing the bigger picture by focusing on stereotypes." Judge Mathis bristled visibly. "Stereotypes? I've seen enough men who don't step up." "Yes," LeBron countered, "but you're treating him like one of those men without verifying the facts. I'm not here to argue for leniency if Brandon is lying, but I am here to demand a fair hearing, free of personal bias." The judge tapped his pen restlessly against the bench. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, voice rising. "My job is to protect children's best interests. I won't let a father's smooth talk overshadow his accountability." LeBron nodded slowly. "Agreed. Accountability is key," he said. "But so is justice, and justice requires open-mindedness." Murmurs of support echoed from various spectators. Meanwhile, Brandon exhaled a deep sigh, turning his attention momentarily to the crumpled pages that lay on the desk. "Your Honor," he said earnestly, "I'm asking you to examine my proof without the assumption that I'm failing my child. That's all I want." Judge Mathis let out a sharp, disapproving breath. He rifled through the pages again, scanning the highlighted sections, lines of bank transactions, messages, and references from Brandon's employer confirming his pay scale and consistent attempts at meeting obligations. LeBron observed quietly, feeling a spark of hope as the judge took at least a moment to see the details. Tammy, however, scoffed, shaking her head in annoyance. "He'll never be consistent." "Your Honor," she insisted, her voice taut with resentment, "he did this for show. He hasn't truly been present." Brandon turned to her, voice quivering with anger and hurt. "That's not true," he insisted. "Even your sister wrote a letter saying, 'I pick up our son every weekend when I'm not on an overnight shift. I call him almost daily, and I've enrolled him in a community basketball clinic.'" At the mention of basketball, LeBron interjected, "I've met many kids who only thrive when both parents engage. Isn't that worth supporting, Your Honor?" Judge Mathis ground his teeth audibly, unconcealed frustration coloring his features. He knew the eyes of the public were locked on to him, especially with LeBron James in the mix. Turning the pages again, he addressed Brandon. Why were you late on 3 separate child support payments this year? Brandon straightened. I lost my second job unexpectedly. I covered rent and groceries first. Then immediately caught up when I received my next paycheck. I have confirmation receipts attached there. He pointed to a small stack of stapled papers. Judge Mathis snatched them, scanning lines of typed records and verifying deposit dates. He murmured grudgingly, perhaps sensing that Brandon's narrative wasn't as flimsy as he'd initially assumed. Tammy rolled her eyes, retorting, his so-called efforts never last. He does things halfway. Brandon clenched his jaw. That's not fair. I have a stable job now. I plan my schedule around my son's events. Check the text messages for proof. Judge Mathis inhaled deeply, flicking to the conversation logs. You're reminding Ms. Jackson of your arrival times for visits. The judge read aloud. You mentioned switching shifts, paying partial support, scheduling a parent-teacher conference. He paused, lips thinning. This indicates more effort than you claimed. Ms. Jackson. Tammy stiffened, cheeks coloring. He could be cherry-picking, Your Honor. At that moment, LeBron James carefully stepped toward the front again. Judge Mathis, please excuse my intrusion, he said, voice measured but firm. I'm sure Ms. Jackson has valid concerns, but fatherhood is complicated, especially when finances are tight. I am asking you respectfully to assess Brandon's track record fairly, not through a lens that automatically assumes he's a negligent father. A hush fell. People in the gallery seemed mesmerized by LeBron's unusual role, an unexpected champion for paternal fairness. The bailiff hovered nearby, uncertain whether to ask LeBron to sit or allow him to continue. Judge Mathis looked exasperated. Mr. James, this is unorthodox. You have no direct stake here. Why press this issue? LeBron pressed his large hands on the wooden railing. Because I've seen too many fathers demonized or discredited when they're genuinely trying, he said, eyes flicking toward Brandon, who swallowed hard, blinking back tears. My foundation works with countless families where the father's presence is crucial. Brandon may not be perfect, but perfection isn't the standard effort. Consistency and genuine care are. Judge Mathis opened his mouth, ready to retort, but paused. The tension in the room felt thick enough to slice. A cameraman from a local news outlet stealthily filmed the entire drama, capturing every nuanced expression, every subtle shift in posture. The judge cleared his throat. In light of recent developments, he began, I'll thoroughly review the evidence one more time. He gestured for the bailiff to gather the scattered documents, now meticulously reassembled in a neat stack. Tammy shifted anxiously, shooting Brandon a glare. Brandon stood straighter, relief flickering across his face. He glanced gratefully at LeBron, who offered a reassuring nod, silently encouraging him to maintain composure. Judge Mathis took his time scanning the records, flipping pages with painstaking deliberation. He reread statements from Brandon's employers, texts with Tammy regarding pickups, a letter from the local youth center praising Brandon's volunteer work during weekend clinics. Flicking his gaze upward, he addressed Tammy directly. You claim he's never around, but I see references to multiple weekend visits, calls on weekdays, plus timely payments, except during his documented unemployment gap. Tammy's face hardened. He's only doing that now because he's under scrutiny. Before, he was inconsistent. Brandon inhaled sharply, voice low but resonant. That's not true. I've been working nonstop to stay afloat, to keep up with support, to show our son he matters. Judge Mathis pressed his lips together. Mr. Jackson, you certainly have some lapses, but the documents indicate improvement. Then his gaze landed on LeBron. Mr. James, I appreciate your concern, but do you see any reason to believe Ms. Jackson is exaggerating? LeBron hesitated, maintaining respectful composure. I don't know Ms. Jackson personally, Your Honor, but the evidence suggests Brandon is genuinely involved. People slip sometimes, especially when juggling multiple responsibilities. I believe in giving credit where it's due. Tammy raised her voice defensively. He's manipulative. He's trying to paint himself as a saint when he was never there at the beginning. Brandon's eyes flickered with sorrow. I admit I struggled, initially. But I've learned, I've grown, I'm here now, fighting to be present. Judge Mathis peered at Tammy. Are you open to acknowledging he's changed? She folded her arms, pressing her lips together in silent defiance. The judge sighed. Court isn't about punishing one parent for past mistakes. If they're willing to rectify them, my priority is the child's well-being. LeBron exhaled slowly, relief mingling with tension. He sensed the judge might be shifting from his initial stance. However, Judge Mathis abruptly scowled, turning his attention back to Brandon. But I don't appreciate being lectured in my own courtroom, he snapped, glancing pointedly at LeBron. You, Mr. Jackson, have put me in an awkward position by inviting outside celebrities. Brandon's eyes widened in alarm. I never invited him, Your Honor, he protested. He came on his own. LeBron stepped forward again. Judge Mathis, I didn't come here to undermine you. I respect the law, but seeing blatant disrespect toward a man who's trying to father his child compelled me to speak up. The judge's nostrils flared. Disrespect. You have some nerve. I have presided over thousands of cases. I know a slacker when I see one. A spark of indignation lit LeBron's expression. With all due respect, that's exactly what I mean. You're labeling Brandon a slacker without conclusive evidence that he's failing. The documentation suggests otherwise. The courtroom's energy crescendoed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Attorneys with unrelated cases peeked in from the hallway, curious about the star athlete confronting a seasoned television judge. Brandon's pulse hammered in his ears. Please, Your Honor, he said, voice cracking. I'm not perfect, but I love my son more than anything. Just give me the chance to prove I'm consistent. Tammy whispered loudly. He had his chance. LeBron turned to her, measuring his words carefully. Sometimes people evolve. The question is whether you want your child to have a father who's involved or remain distant out of fear that his efforts won't be acknowledged. Judge Mathis slammed his palm on the bench, raising his voice. Enough chatter. I'm going to make a decision. Silence fell like a heavy curtain, everyone bracing for the result. I find that while Mr. Jackson has had some irregularities in payments, the evidence shows sustained attempts to maintain contact and provide support since gaining stable employment. He eyed Tammy. It's in the child's best interest to have a father, especially one who's demonstrating progress. Brandon's breath caught, relief flickering across his eyes. Tammy's face twisted with frustration. Don't tell me you're just going to let him waltz back in without repercussions, she exclaimed. Judge Mathis frowned. I'm imposing a structured plan. Mr. Jackson, you will maintain your child support payments in a timely manner and continue your scheduled visitations. You will also attend co-parenting classes to ensure better communication with Ms. Jackson. Then he turned a steely glance at Brandon. If you fail to comply, I'll revisit this arrangement swiftly. Brandon nodded, feeling tears threaten to spill. Thank you, Your Honor. I promise I won't let my son down, Tammy huffed, turning away in visible disapproval, but said nothing more. LeBron cleared his throat, stepping back graciously. I appreciate your willingness to review everything fairly, Judge Mathis. Sometimes. That's all a man needs, a fair chance to prove himself. Judge Mathis grunted, uncertain how to respond, still smarting from being publicly challenged. Court is adjourned, he barked, slamming his gavel and abruptly rising. At first it seemed the judge would storm out without another word, but he paused, turning slightly toward Brandon. Don't make me regret this leniency, he warned. Brandon bowed his head. Understood, Your Honor. The tension broke as the bailiff announced the end of proceedings, and people shuffled out. Tammy brushed past Brandon, ignoring his attempt to speak to her politely. He sighed, deciding that maybe a calmer moment would arrive soon, once emotions settled, as the courtroom began to empty. LeBron James extended his hand to Brandon, who shook it with reverence bordering on disbelief. "Thank you," Brandon murmured, voice trembling with gratitude. "I never could have predicted you would be here, let alone stand up for me like that." LeBron offered a gentle smile. "I just wanted to ensure you got a fair hearing," he replied. "Keep your word now. This is your chance to be there for your kid, consistently and wholeheartedly. Don't waste it." Brandon nodded firmly. "I won't, I swear." A small group of reporters rushed forward, microphones aimed at LeBron. "Mr. James," one asked breathlessly, "why did you choose to speak up in this custody dispute? Don't you worry about backlash?" LeBron met the question without hesitation. "There's no backlash in standing for what's right," he said simply. "I'm a father too, and I know the importance of fatherly presence. Brandon deserves a chance if he's genuinely committed." Another reporter questioned whether LeBron had any personal issues with Judge Mathis. "I respect the judge's achievements," LeBron answered carefully. "But I believe everyone, regardless of background, deserves respectful treatment in court." Meanwhile, Judge Mathis, lingering near the exit, overheard the interview. His jaw tightened. Perhaps he felt a twinge of regret for allowing personal bias to overshadow his judicial decorum. Perhaps he resented being upstaged by a sports icon. Regardless, the day's events were already swirling through social media, fueling debates about paternal rights, celebrity influence, and judicial behavior. Brandon's ex-wife remained nearby, huddled with her own friends, throwing chilly glances in his direction. She refused to speak to reporters but murmured loudly about the stunt pulled by both Brandon and LeBron. Brandon straightened his shoulders, determined not to engage in heated confrontation. Eventually, the corridors cleared, and only a few individuals remained, including Brandon and LeBron. Brandon exhaled, relief mingling with a sense of renewed purpose. LeBron placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. "This is just the beginning," LeBron said kindly. "Make sure you keep those promises to your child. Over time, Tammy might see your dedication is real." Brandon nodded fervently. "I will. I can't express how thankful I am that you spoke up." LeBron gave a modest shrug. "Sometimes we all need somebody in our corner," he said. "When I was growing up, I had mentors who believed in me. If I can pay that forward, I will." They exchanged a brief hug, the raw emotion between them carrying the weight of hope and responsibility. Outside, paparazzi lights flashed, capturing shots of LeBron James alongside Brandon Jackson, an unlikely duo thrust together by the drama of a fiery courtroom showdown. As news outlets rushed to broadcast the sensational story, headlines began to appear online within minutes. LeBron James clashes with Judge Mathis over father's rights. NBA superstar defends struggling dad. And public outcry after Judge Mathis's harsh remarks. Within hours, social media lit up with commentary. Some praised LeBron for intervening, calling him a champion of the underprivileged. Others argued he overstepped his boundaries, claiming that celebrities should stay out of legal disputes unless they're personally involved. Many questioned Judge Mathis's impartiality, citing this event as a prime example of bias toward men from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Meanwhile, in his chambers, Judge Mathis paced restlessly, replaying the dramatic confrontation in his head. He built his television persona on tough love and no-nonsense verdicts, but the presence of LeBron James had magnified his every move. By dismissing Brandon's evidence so flippantly, had he jeopardized his professional credibility? His clerk hovered near the door, unsure whether to offer reassurance or remain silent. In the hallway, Tammy dialed her sister, voice trembling with anger. "He got away with it," she said bitterly. "He had LeBron freaking James, making him look like a saint. Now everybody thinks I'm the bad guy." Her sister's response was muffled, but Tammy hissed, "I don't care if he's stepping up now. He should have been there from the start." Brandon hearing part of her conversation, approached cautiously. "Tammy," he said, voice quiet yet resolute. "I know this is difficult. I accept responsibility for my shortcomings. But I promise I'll keep improving. Let's try to what's best for our son." She shot him a frosty glare before walking away without answering. LeBron caught sight of the exchange and sighed, understanding that real healing would take time and consistent effort. "Don't let our hostility discourage you," he advised Brandon gently. "Focus on your child." Brandon nodded. "I will," he whispered, glancing at the exit where paparazzi lingered. "I guess we'd better go," he said, looking uncertain. LeBron patted him on the back. "I've got my own commitments," the superstar said, "but if you ever need guidance, reach out. I'm serious." Brandon blinked, barely believing he was having this conversation with an NBA legend. "Thank you," he managed. "I don't even know how to contact you, though." LeBron grinned. "Ask around at the community center," he answered. "They'll get a message to me. I do a lot of work there. And stay in touch. Let me know how it goes." They parted ways under the bright glare of camera flashes, stepping into a world that now buzzed with the drama that had unfolded. Word spread quickly that Judge Mathis had insulted a black father on national television, only to be called out by LeBron James, who had refused to let prejudice overshadow truth. The following day, talk shows dissected the entire event. Clips of the courtroom meltdown circulated, fueling debates about paternal rights, the responsibilities of judges, and the power of celebrity influence. Some hosts criticized LeBron for inserting himself into legal matters uninvited. Others applauded him for using his platform to champion those who lacked a voice. Brandon watched the coverage from his modest apartment, tears of gratitude streaming down his cheeks as he replayed the moment LeBron stood up to the judge. He felt vindicated, validated, and more determined than ever to prove his son's importance in his life. Meanwhile, Tammy raged online, posting comments accusing Brandon of playing victim. Some people supported her stance, believing she was protecting her child from false promises. Others condemned her for refusing to acknowledge Brandon's sincere efforts. In time, new developments arose. Brandon, bolstered by the encouragement he'd received, faithfully attended co-parenting sessions, paid his support on time, and remained consistent in picking up his son. Though Tammy's bitterness lingered, she couldn't deny that Brandon's improvements were real. Their son, a bright-eyed boy brimming with curiosity, gradually began bragging at school about "my dad, who even got help by LeBron James." The child's enthusiasm softened Tammy's anger, opening the slightest crack of possibility for eventual reconciliation of sorts. For Judge Mathis, the backlash was swift. Producers of his television program asked for clarification about his conduct in that hearing. Viewers flooded social media, some defending him as a strict but fair judge, others lambasting him for humiliating a father who turned out to have legitimate evidence. Rumors circulated about an internal review, although no official statement was released. The judge, stung by criticism, considered releasing a clarifying video in which he might appear gracious, acknowledging that he sometimes pushes litigants to test their resolve. But he knew the damage to his public image might already be done. Meanwhile, LeBron James went about his usual philanthropic endeavors. But interviewers wouldn't stop asking about his confrontation with Judge Mathis. "I spoke because I saw a father being dismissed unfairly," he reiterated calmly. "That's not about meddling, that's about standing up for family. I'd do it again, if necessary." Each time, he deflected the spotlight onto the broader issue of creating a balanced, supportive environment for children. While some critics called him an attention seeker, many praised his willingness to advocate for the underdog. Several weeks later, the media storm died down, replaced by fresh scandals and viral moments. But for Brandon Jackson, the impact was life-altering. He was now recognized occasionally around town. Strangers approached him, saying, "Aren't you that dad LeBron defended?" He'd nod, shyly admitting, "Yeah, that's me," uncertain whether it was pride or embarrassment flooding his cheeks. One weekend, After a successful co-parenting session, Brandon returned his son to Tammy's place right on schedule. Tammy answered the door with arms crossed, but she didn't immediately hurl accusations. Instead, she studied Brandon's face. "You're still here," she said flatly. Brandon nodded. "Yeah, I said I would be." She paused, tension heavy between them, then said, "He's inside. He had a good time with you today." Brandon forced a small smile. "I'm glad. I hope to keep it up." Tammy looked away, uncertain, torn between lingering anger and an inkling of respect. "All right," she muttered, stepping aside to let their son, a beaming grin, lighting his little face, hug his father goodbye. Brandon crouched down, ruffling his son's hair. "I'll see you next weekend." "Okay." The boy nodded excitedly. Tammy watched, arms still folded, but something in her eyes softened. The memory of that dramatic day in court, with LeBron James stepping in, might never fully fade for any of them, but maybe, just maybe, it had opened a door for positive change. And so the ripple effects continued. Brandon didn't transform overnight into the world's best father, but he remained dedicated. Co-parenting classes improved his communication with Tammy, reducing their hostility incrementally. The child thrived, relishing every moment he spent with both parents. In the local community, people whispered about the day Judge Mathis insulted a black dad on live television and nearly got away with it, until a global basketball icon set the record straight. Some folks even speculated that the judge secretly admired LeBron's courage, though pride prevented him from admitting it. Regardless, the story persisted as a testament to the power of standing up for those who can't fight alone. Back at the youth center, where Brandon occasionally volunteered, staff members approached him one afternoon. They'd received a message on his behalf, presumably from someone in LeBron's camp. The staffer handed Brandon a sealed envelope. Inside was a simple note, scrawled in bold handwriting, "Keep going." "I see you," LJ Brandon smiled, carefully tucking the note into his wallet. He remembered the anxiety, the humiliation he'd experienced when Judge Mathis had unleashed those disparaging words. He remembered how LeBron James, quietly seated among strangers, had risen to challenge the misguided assumptions with calm determination. That memory fueled him every time he felt discouraged, every time he faced financial strain or emotional conflict. It reminded him that being a father was worth the struggle, and that sometimes all it took was one voice speaking truth to power to change an entire narrative. Meanwhile, somewhere in his chambers, Judge Mathis might have reflected on that confrontation, wrestling with the realization that perhaps his preconceived notions about struggling fathers had overshadowed objective fairness. And though he wouldn't publicly concede the lesson he'd learned, maybe in future cases he would approach such situations with at least a fraction more empathy. Tammy, for her part, remained guarded, reluctant to trust that Brandon's progress was permanent. But each week that passed with Brandon fulfilling his commitments, her walls chipped away. Their son's laughter, the bright promise of his future, became a bridge connecting two people who once only shared bitterness. Across social media, occasional posts would resurface, short video clips capturing that legendary court session. Judge Mathis's harsh words, LeBron James rising calmly, addressing injustice head-on. Comments poured in from people everywhere, debating whether Brandon was truly reformed or simply lucky. Yet, most recognized a universal truth. Hearing out a father who wants to be involved is seldom a mistake. Even critics of LeBron's intervention admitted that, in the end, the real winner was the child who gained consistent paternal love. Months later, Tammy finally allowed Brandon to pick their son up from school without a prior confrontation. That afternoon, the boy ran into his father's arms, chattering about a basketball workshop he hoped to join. "I want to shoot hoops like LeBron James," he exclaimed, eyes shining. Brandon laughed warmly. "We'll practice together," he promised. And in that moment, everything from the dramatic court hearing to the bitterness of the past seemed to fade, replaced by a single bright beam of hope. As for LeBron, he continued juggling his responsibilities, games, philanthropic endeavors, media appearances, never once regretting his choice to speak up. In quiet moments, he'd recall the look of relief on Brandon's face and the stunned silence of Judge Mathis. That memory affirmed his commitment to using his platform for good, no matter how inconvenient or controversial it might sometimes be. Over time, the public's fixation on the incident waned. Judge Mathis carried on with his television persona, often ribbing defendants who tried to manipulate the system, but a tiny sliver of humility lurked beneath his bluster. Tammy and Brandon established an uneasy but steadily improving co-parenting relationship, ensuring their son felt supported and loved by both parents. And in the background of it all, the faint echo of a gavel banging and an NBA star's voice saying, "He deserves a fair chance," lingered as a reminder that sometimes the most unlikely heroes step in at precisely the right moment. Real change isn't always flashy or immediate. It unfolds in the day-to-day choices to do better, to show up, to care. Brandon Jackson kept showing up week after week for every practice, every teacher conference, every doctor appointment, and with each small act of fatherhood, he proved that Judge Mathis's initial insult had been misplaced, that a man once dismissed as a deadbeat could indeed rise above circumstances. Spurred by one dramatic intervention on a day that would forever remain etched in courtroom history, in a sense. Judge Mathis's insult ignited a broader conversation about empathy, paternal rights, and the stereotypes attached to black fathers. LeBron James's stand exemplified the power of moral courage. The synergy of these events, though tumultuous, led to a more balanced outcome, reminding everyone that justice is not about piling scorn on those who stumble, but guiding them toward the responsibilities they can fulfill. In the end, Brandon's victory was not about triumphing over Tammy or shaming Judge Mathis. It was about realizing that unconditional love for a child transcends grudges, biases, and even court rulings. It was about finding the will to persevere amid adversity. It was about accepting help from an unexpected, legendary source and transforming that support into tangible actions that shaped a brighter future. So, while the sensational headlines eventually faded, replaced by fresh scandals and daily news cycles, this story remained in the hearts of those who witnessed it. They remembered how Judge Greg Mathis insulted a black dad in open court, only to regret it the moment LeBron James rose from the crowd with unwavering resolve. They remembered the hush that fell, the unstoppable force of truth pushing back against hasty judgments, and the final hammer of the gavel heralding not a defeat, but a cautious hope for reconciliation. And that is how a single father's humble determination, coupled with a world-famous athlete's bold intervention, broke through prejudice in a dramatic twist of fate, forging a new path for a little boy who deserved a loving presence of both parents. Once lost, but ultimately found.